Hello, everyone, and this is Surayya, your host for the Personal Professional. If you know me, you know that God is everything to me. I am definitely a woman of faith. In fact, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God. As a former church kid, my foundation of faith has served me well throughout my life. I wonder, have you ever asked yourself, how does your faith affect your professional life? For many, faith is a foundation that everything in their life is built upon, career included. For this conversation, I am joined by Fadaka George, who I had the pleasure of co-hosting with, a DEI advocate and caretaker of leaders, as she discusses her faith with me and the impact it has had on her career development moving forward. This episode is entitled Psalms for the Trailblazer, and it is my hope that this conversation gives you the gumption to sing your own psalm as you work diligently toward blazing a trail and craft the life of your dreams. This episode is fantastic. I had such fun editing it. We talk about everything from our values to our favorite psalms to even what we think about Beyonce's Church Girl. And from there, we talk about our college careers, but also our careers today and how our faith has set the foundation for that. I really hope that you enjoy. Thank you. All right, y'all, it's Surayya, and I'm back with the Purposeful Professional. Today, I have a very special guest. I'm Fadaka George. Fadaka, introduce yourself to the podcast.
Hi, guys. I am Fadaka George. I don't even know how to introduce myself, but
anything. Okay, cool.
So my values are community, diversity, and compassion. That's really been the word for this month for me, is compassion. So I would introduce myself with my values. I have done a variety of things in terms of career. I am a University of Maryland, Baltimore County alum, undergraduate. Very proud to be. Former medical receptionist, missionary, bridal stylist, and my favorite food at the moment is grits with pork belly. So there you go.
Yeah, very cool. I feel like the bridal stylist is what gets me. Like, I have to say, that's a cool job, because Say Yes to the Dress has glamorized being a bridal stylist. And I'm thinking, like, dang, Fadaka was a bridal stylist. Okay. That's the one where I'm like, okay, this is a little interesting. And then, fun fact, I've never had grits in my life.
What?
Yeah, I'm so not from the South. I've never had grits in my entire life. Like, I don't even know what they taste like. They look really good with shrimp, but I've never.
They're good with shrimp.
Yeah, no, they look really
making it for you.
No, they look like it tastes really, really good with shrimp. Like, every time I see shrimp and grits with the gravy on top of it, I'm like, wow, that looks fire. But I've never had anyone make grits for me. Food can connect us as people. I think that's amazing too. So we are here to talk about Psalms for the Trailblazer, finding peace and challenging the status quo. Now, for my listeners, Fadaka's a diverse person. Y'all heard all the careers she listed, all the jobs she's listed. But also, I think what is pretty unique about you is that you have this spirit about you that it's like you're about that action. Like, you're about bringing the change. It is evident in your spirit. It is evident in who you are. And then when we began to talk and we realized we both share faith, why not talk about that? Like, how do you, like, a psalm for the trailblazer, like a psalm is a prayer that David wrote onto God. And I think that it's very special when we can come together in a space where we can talk about not only faith, but our love for using faith as a source of strength to challenge the status quo, to develop an interest in diversity and inclusion, to think about community and equity and diversity and the values you listed. Because I think a lot of the time people assume, oh, you're a Christian, you just go along to get along and you don't really, rattle any feathers. But I think your life exemplifies that. You can have, as a trailblazer, a psalm or a spiritual mandate that you lean upon in your work. So I would love to just get into that. Just jump straight into that. So in our pre-conversation, we talked a lot about like the Psalms and how Psalms makes us reflect upon our lives and our faith. I want to know, like, first and foremost, what makes the book of Psalms significant to you? And if you have a favorite Psalm, what is it?
What makes the book of Psalms significant to me? What makes it significant to me is its realness
Mm.
and what was happening in each psalm. So there's a rawness of emotion, whether that be praise and excitement and joy to like, I'm hurting and I'm so depressed right now that I love how David describes it in one psalm that like his pillow is just so filled with tears. Like it's so soaked with his tears. And I just love the realness of that because I think it's so easy in, I think, American Christian culture
Mm.
to speak Christianese. Like somebody says, "How are you?" You're like, I'm
Yeah.
blessed.
I agree. I think the realness and the rawness of Psalms, I have to say, that's something I really love. I also love how the Psalms makes God almost like a friend to us.
Yeah.
When we get into the mind of David and the prayers he prayed to God, we realize that God is a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad that you talked about the Christianese as well. We can't translate that, I'm here for you spirit to Christian spaces because we do feel the need to say, hey, blessed and highly favored, God is good. Like we feel the need to put on. I was raised in the church, so I know church people can really put on, but
Yeah.
David went through every emotion and God was always there. And oftentimes when he was writing the Psalms, it's like a conversation. I remember growing up and hearing prayer is a conversation between you and God.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
truly believe prayer is a conversation. And David would always write God's response. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Like, I'm here. I'm here. God would always tell him, I'm here. Even in the midst of your pain, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what makes the Psalm so significant to me. Same. I totally agree. Like that rawness and that realness. And David sinned. He did things that God did not want him to do, but he still always came back to God and he
Mm-hmm.
always glorified God. And I think that element of Psalms, like you said, that worship element can also be very powerful
Yeah.
because it's like, even in the midst of my pain, I can still glorify God. So
Mm-hmm.
I can go on and on and on because that's one of my books, but I love that. So do you have a favorite psalm? Like, do you have a favorite psalm?
I don't have a favorite psalm actually, which is funny. I have
Mm.
I have there's so many psalms that I've connected to at different points so far in my life that to say like this psalm is the favorite is so hard for me. And I feel so cheesy saying it in this season is Psalm 23.
Mm.
And this season has become like super potent for me, especially that line of like, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because your rod and your staff comfort me. I think comfort and guide me. I want to make sure I get the translation right. Because I think oftentimes there's this sense of it's all supposed to be rosy and like wonderful and sunshine and like we ain't supposed to have problems. And that's not true. That's not life at all. But I love that, like, in the midst of being in like the valley, in the depths, in the pit, like the Lord is still there, like guiding, still present, comforting. And I have no reason to fear because I'm not alone and I'm not lost, which is very important. This is very like pertinent for me in this moment, like in this season of life where it's like it's been like back to back to back to back of things happening. So for me right now, Psalms 23 has been very important. What about you? Do you have a favorite song?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Oh,
Uh,
she's ready.
yeah. No,
So,
I'm ready. So I grew up saying Psalm 91 like all the time, which is like the protection psalm. But I feel like Psalm 73, it just comes in my spirit all the time. And I'm going to read a verse from Psalm 73. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Psalm 73:26. I think this concept of being able to cry out to God, even if your flesh fails, because we're human, like we go through things, and I can't even say like even the most church girl Christian, and we're going to talk about church girlism a bit later after this. Even the most church girl Christian can fall, so even when my flesh fails, I can still lift up my hands and know that God is the strength of my heart. And it's like, it's this thing of God being within us that we cannot deny. So I think that's why Psalm 73 is really pertinent. And like you, like I could just verse after verse after verse. I'm not really like a legalist in terms of the Bible. Sometimes I forget where the texts come from. But I always remember like, oh, I heard something in a sermon and like this resonates with me very deeply. So yeah, let me tell you, like Psalms is really the book. Before we get into the more, the church girl life, right?
Mhm.
I want to ask you, what did you think of Beyonce's Church Girl? Like,
I
what did you
didn't
think
even
of it?
know that was a song until I saw it in your questionnaire. I was like, oh, that's a song. And so I actually listened to it an hour and a half ago. But then the comments is what got me. Like I scrolled down to the comments on YouTube and people were like explaining the song. And I was like, oh, okay, like this makes sense. Like now, so like I love when one person called it like dance floor theology, where I felt like it's a great term to use for it because growing up in a West African church culture
Okay.
where dancing is a big part of how we do praise. It's how we worship. My grandma can booty shake better than I can. And it's not seen as weird or like, like what you doing that for? This ain't a club. You know what I mean? Like, I love the fact that somebody puts it like it really encompasses how like you're still like the church girl on Sunday and the church girl on Saturday at the club. Like it's not this like I'm one here and then I'm one there. Like it's all encompassing because God is everywhere, right? And he can be found on the dance floor as well. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I thought that was that was a really cool way to put it.
Yeah, no, somebody was deep in the comments.
Somebody was all of them were.
Comments.
I had to screenshot it.
Yeah, for me, like church girl, I get that. And I like that dance floor theology analogy. I'm gonna build on that because I feel like for me, a huge part of my identity growing up was that I was in the church, but I also was a dancer. And I did not just do praise dance, I did secular dancing. So I did hip hop, jazz, tap dance, all that other stuff. And I remember my grandmother who she's Pentecostal. So for those who know, she's definitely one of those. Like she was like, hey, I don't want you dancing that secular dance anymore. And I remember thinking, well, I love to dance and God has given me this body as a vessel. I'm a good dancer. Might not be what I do now, but I'm a pretty good dancer. And I just love dancing. I love music. And I feel like we need to be able to see anything that our body can do as an act of glorifying God, especially at the highest level, like creating music and dancing. You're glorifying God with that. I can't say that I 100% don't understand the controversy behind the song. I do, but I think Church Girl, for a lot of us, it just exemplifies the fact that, hey, that church girl that you see, she's multifaceted. Like, don't judge her. I remember growing up and feeling bad for the pastor's kids, the PKs, because everyone always thought they were like super straight laced and they felt like they had to be somebody that they weren't to prove that they weren't. And I think Beyonce just real natural with it, like church girl, like you're this person on Saturday, you're this person on Sunday, but you're still that same person. Yeah. And I think that's the multifacetedness that I want Christian people, especially Christian women, to have. It's not sinful to listen to a secular song. It's definitely not. It's not sinful to dance. And like I said, my grandmother was Pentecostal, so we grew up hearing certain songs shouldn't be played, certain dances shouldn't be danced, and also certain pants shouldn't be worn if you're a woman. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's kind of how it was. And, I wasn't, my mother wasn't like that. So my mother was a bit different. She allowed me to dance secular music. She allowed me to have that. And I think that's why to this day, I'm still a Christian, because I think I had that healthy introduction versus that you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. Because a lot of people who had that are no longer in the church today. So as much as it was a controversial song, I really do like Beyonce for going there. Because I think sometimes it takes somebody outside the church to remind you, hey, you're somebody outside of this, and God still loves you in all of that. So speaking of church girl, right? What was it like for you growing up in the church? Like, what was that experience like?
I would say varied. So I believe my mom and I immigrated to the US from Nigeria in like 95. And we first lived in the Bronx, New York. Everybody can have whatever feelings they want to have about Bronx people. We still the best, whatever. And going to church in the Bronx was definitely very unique. But very like, I don't know, international. Like I saw a variety of things. Like Church was long. I loved buying candy from the penny store back when the penny store was a thing where all you had was a nickel and you could get like gobstoppers and like all those things, you know. So like I enjoy that experience. But my mom was a single parent for a really long time, so she had this mentality towards church of like, go where the Holy Spirit wants us to be. Let's not go where we feel comfortable necessarily, but go where the Holy Spirit is calling us to be, is what I took away from my mom. So we church hop a lot. So sometimes I was in churches that were like very straight laced. I was like one of the few people of color in the room, you know, and like they'll say certain things and I'm like, why? Like always asking why. And there were some times where I was in other churches, like when I moved to Massachusetts, the church we actually went to church in Rhode Island, and it was shared by so my pastor was Nigerian, and we shared the church space with a Spanish speaking church. So sometimes we had services together, and so like they're translating back and forth. And like people used to joke, they used to, because I was so used to it, like, you hear Histu spiritual, you're like, oh yes, yeah, I get that. Like, and people used to use me as the timer in church because I would fall asleep as soon as the sermon started and wake up as soon as the sermon was ending. So it became this running joke in our church where it was like, oh, Fadaka's about to sleep. Yeah, sermon about to start. Oh, she's awake now. We wrapping up. I said like when I moved to Maryland, where I spent a majority of like my tween and teenage years, and really became that choir girl. I saw it as like, my mom's mentality was like, I'm not going to tell you how to live your faith. I'm going to show you. And if you glean anything from what I'm doing, then great. I'm not going to assume that you're a Christian just because you go to church in my household. That is for you to accept when you are ready to take ownership of your spiritual walk. And so I never necessarily felt pressure from my mom to be like, but my mom was very honest in her family prayer time about, Lord, save the souls of my children, like everything. Like my mom was always very honest in her prayer. So, and I loved church. I loved the community I felt at church. I loved, like I was a church secretary for a long time. Okay. And like at one point, like at 13, it was like my first time leading choir, like a worship set. And they were like, yeah, go. And it was terrible. And so I just have really good memories of being like discipled and raised to be a leader within church. Like, I think it really was part of the shaping of me becoming a leader. And I didn't realize how radical it was until I got older. But my lead pastor of our church was a female, which in my head, I was like, I don't know why that's a big deal. Like, that's cool. But
yeah, that's cool. Facts.
She's a person, shout out to Pastor Stella. But like, I used to have so many good conversations with her. Like, I would just ask her, like, can I fast on my period? And like, isn't it kind of weird that the Holy Spirit like impregnated Mary? Like, can we talk about that? And she'd be like, yeah, let's talk about it. Oh, wow. She's the person to explain to me the difference between equality and equity. So like, for me, I like, these people really shepherded me during this like critical teenage years.
Nah, I'm hearing a lot of things. First and foremost, shout out to like the churches in the Bronx, because so I grew up, my family's Jamaican, but we live right outside of the Bronx. So I grew up in like going to churches all over, from like Mount Vernon, which is like right outside of the Bronx, to the actual Bronx. And yes, there are a lot of African churches, there are a lot of West Indian churches, and the churches they be something else. For those who have never experienced that sort of church, the spirit is moving, definitely. It can be a bit extra, but it's funny how that's what made you, like that environment, and your mother, she followed the spirit. I hear a lot of people do that. That's very similar to my family. My mother would say the same thing, like, we're going where the spirit wants us to go. And we also went to a lot of churches growing up, and including different Christian schools. I want to get into Fadaka, the church, the choir girl, Fadaka, the singer, Fadaka, the worship leader. And I want to know, like, what was the experience of worship like for you as a child? And like, were you one of those people that people just said, she's anointed, like, give her the mic? Because some people have that. Or was it something that came about gradually?
I don't really remember too many times people saying that I'm anointed. Okay. I do remember though, I remember feeling like So, okay, background. My mom was in choir. So I used to go to rehearsals with her all the time.
Mm.
And then, of course, being in the children's church, they put on little choir stuff. And as a kid, again, I was always off with the beat. Like everybody going right. Fadaka's the one going left in the corner all the time. It's on video. It's really bad. And my mom was like, you never knew the words. Like you were like mouthing something, but not what they were singing. And so it was really hard. So I never really saw myself as like a good singer, like at all.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't until when we moved to Maryland, I started going to RCCG. For those who know RCCG, like if you know, you know. And they were like, if they hear you sing one thing in the bathroom, they're like, oh, join choir. You have a voice. Come join choir.
Oh, yeah.
That audition that you didn't even know you were auditioning for, you were just minding your business. And so that's how I ended up on choir as like a tween. Was they heard me singing in the bathroom. They were like, oh, okay, yeah, come join the choir. Yeah, you use it for the Lord. And I remember just wanting to, it was so bad. I remember praying at one point. I didn't really feel like I had this like amazing voice. I was like, Lord, like if you just let me hit high notes, I'm telling you, I will use it for your glory. Like I will use it for your glory. Like, and just feeling like the stage was like this my safe place, because on the stage, like all the racing thoughts that I had melted away. I was just like so focused on like praising and worshiping God, and it didn't matter what happened before I got on the stage. But once I'm on that stage, it was like God is my, and I love that feeling of like just divine focus of like here, and learning to be a good backup vocal. You know, I think a lot of times I know people want to be up, and some people want to be up front and center, but I genuinely enjoyed doing backup vocals in choir. I really did. You know, like holding the song down while the lead ad-lib, you know, and did whatever they want, and making sure the girls were tight in the back and we were like keeping a harmony, or like keeping an eye on the instrumentalism, being like speed it up, slow it down, we're gonna take it again, you know, like just I love just being part of like to help build a foundation so that other people could just go and do what the Spirit was calling them to do. And so sincerely enjoyed that. So when I was asked to start leading at 13, I was like, what?
At 13. Oh, God.
They like to just be like, here you go. This is how we bring up the next generation.
Oh my God. No, I'm still dead at the fact that like you were literally singing in the bathroom and then somebody recruited you to be a part of the choir.
Yeah.
Okay, so a Black church is a Black church. Because many of us have had that experience of like, I can sing? No, I don't think I can sing. I don't think I can sing.
By the end of the year, you hitting notes you didn't even know you could hit. You like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. No, those choir practices can definitely work. I love what you said, because I think you're introducing us to this concept of worshiper, not as a singer per se, but as someone who has a heart to do it. And I feel like a lot of people miss out on being a part of the worship team, myself included, because we feel like, oh, well, I can't sing, so it's no place for me. Nah, like it's about praising God. And I think that's where you get into like this worship coordinator thing that you call yourself, right? A coordinator instead of a leader, because you're really just making sure that you play your part so that others can, if they feel led by the Spirit, jump out, do that crazy stuff. I mean, some of these churches are like a whole concert every single week. You got praise leaders like floating in the audience. It's a bit different in some of these churches, but you provide the platform for people to, like, if they want to be extra, be extra. If they want to chill in the back, chill in the back. So I love that how you have like this coordinator vibe, not necessarily leader, because you don't necessarily want to be out there in the front, but it's about you and God when you worship. And I think that's something that's very, very beautiful and very wonderful. And it shows that, like, hey, even if you can't sing, there's a spot for you within worship, because we all were created to worship. We all were created to worship God. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, your church threw you in there. A lot of us got thrown to the wolves. If it wasn't singing, it was, oh, I need you to praise dance, or I need you to be part of the church play, or I need to usher, or work the soundboard. Yeah, like that's the one thing that I feel like the church doesn't have anymore. Like the young people were worked. And I don't really see that anymore. But anyway, I want to get into this thing of you like being in college, right? So we're going to fast forward to you in college, and you were still worshiping, but this time you were at a PWI and at one of the campus churches, right? So how did this experience within college, and I don't know if you want to talk about this experience a bit too, shape your understanding of faith, God, worship, and yourself?
So yes, I did go to a PWI, which is funny because UMBC for PWIs is actually like pretty diverse. Like back when I went from 2012 to 2015, it was 49% minorities to 51% majority white, which is crazy when you look at like stats, like what, like, so I would say like going, because the year before I'd gone to York College of Pennsylvania, shout out to YCP, and which was such a great informative experience for me in terms of owning my faith walk as an adult, because that's why I really felt like I experienced like what it meant to be like a Christian in community, like people who are on the same page, who are trying to like really walk the walk and not just talk the talk about following Jesus. And so it like really built me up in that way. And it was a PWI. And then when I transferred to UMBC, it was such a culture shock because it was like, I saw Black people look at them, their braids were on point, you know, like their hair was, you know, everything was snatched.
It was laid, yeah. Everything laid.
Everything laid. Koreans saying this is like a catwalk, you know, like they weren't playing with nobody. Like I saw everybody of every type. I met 3 Abby Shakes my first week I was so confused. I was like, but now I know 3 of them. Like, what is going on? So it was like just mind blowing to me. And I was like, wow, like just to see the beauty and the diversity of it all. And so like I went and decided to join the local, like the campus chapter of the fellowship I was in, YCP. And I experienced another culture shock where I found that it was not like what I experienced my first year of college. It was definitely different. It was very cliquey. Didn't really come off as welcoming, to be honest. I don't think that was people's intention, which I would later find out was not. But I didn't really feel like it was easy to just connect with people. And that was a really heartbreaking moment for me because I'd had just this amazing like Christian community experience at my previous school. And I thought, oh, it's going to be the same. And it wasn't. And I was like, oh, instead there's like tension here and division. And so,
Oh my God,
it really was like, I was like, God, maybe I'll go join another fellowship because I don't know. But the Lord was like, nah, this is where I want you. Every single time was like, nope, this is where I want you. And I was like, and so over time, I started having conversations with people of color who were at that particular chapter of the fellowship, and their thoughts on like the community. And some of the things they shared was like just really sad of like not feeling welcomed, like loving the vision of what the organization stood for in terms of like that God is in every culture, and like he shows his image, his different images through those cultures, you know, and like Christ is for all nations, and does not mean that like it has to come from the West to show Christ from all nations. That like Christ is just doing everything regardless of if white people are coming to save us through mission programs, like, and like I had never heard it said from a PWI perspective before. Like as a Nigerian, I know that we send like missionaries to America all the time. But when you tell white people like, yeah, Africa can come to be a missionary to America, they're like, what? To us? It's like, yeah, to you.
Oh, okay. Fadaka, you touching on a lot with that. Your whole college experience is touching on a lot. First and foremost, I was thinking when you were talking about like your other fellowship at your previous school, I was just thinking, man, I love that for her. Like, I love that you were able to be in that space where you saw your culture represented. And I feel like going back to this topic of God and faith, God was so intentional to have you in that space before he placed you at the second space.
Yes.
Because I think that was your like beginning in Genesis and DEI work.
Yes.
You might not have seen it as that, but that was the beginning, because you're now going to people and you're like, hey, I see where even in the house of the Lord, which is a place where we should be united, there's segregation, there's cliques. It's not necessarily right. And you didn't just sit there and accept it. I feel like a lot of the time in the church, we accept it. It's like, hey, well, we say heaven is going to be all races, right? But we still have segregated churches, and we say it's normal. Even within mixed race churches, we still segregate in small groups in Bible studies. And we see that as normal. And I feel like you have that spirit where you were like, hey, it's not normal. And even you said you felt like leaving, but God was like, hey, no, I'm calling you to this. So that I feel like you had I feel like you had a huge purpose there. So I want you to talk a little bit more about like what you think caused this segregation, and what do you think like causes the segregation in the broader church, right?
Wow, that's deep. I think part of what caused the segregation, I think at that particular chapter was, I think, an unspoken sense of superiority, to be honest, in my opinion. I think there was a sense of, and don't get me wrong, like I later become really cool with a lot of these people, and really grateful for how they poured into me, because I learned a lot of things from them too that I needed to learn, that God used to teach me. But I think that there was this like unspoken like superiority of like, you know, some of them were like homeschooled and thought they knew better. Some of them, I grew up in public school all the way. Okay. Public school all the way. So I'm real quick to cut to the chase. Like, I don't survive public school in the US. Bruh. Like, y'all need to no. Or like, I just felt like there was this unspoken superiority, and also narrow-mindedness about how certain things are supposed to be done and what makes something biblical and theologically sound. And I feel like I just came from a whole different direction. I was like, no, I don't agree with that.
But that was your spirit of boldness. I gotta hop in and say that was the spirit of boldness that you had within you, where you were like, hey, I'm not just gonna accept this as normal. When you talked about unspoken spirit superiority, I just began to think about the denominations we have in the church, and how some people are SDA, some people are, which SDA is Seventh-day Adventist, some people are Catholic, some people are Protestant, some people are a different group. And based on that, it's like, oh, well, we think we're better. So then when you layer in like cultural factors, it's like, hey, I don't like the way you worship. I think very different. So I think like those cultural differences fundamentally sometimes create that divide, and both sides, I'm going to say it and say both sides can think that they're superior to the others.
Oh, yes.
You know, I'll hear some people be like, oh, well, that group of people don't worship. I mean, they do worship. It might not be as open and as expressive, but they do worship. So I find it very great that you were able to locate that that divide. And then you talked about missionary work, and I want to get into like your experience of being a missionary, because I feel like that's also something that I would love for us to talk about. But there's this thing of like automatically one group of people should be the missionaries for another group. And traditionally, it's always like people, the Americanized people, the Eurocentric people going into Africa and the third world and prolicizing these people, when in reality it's like, well, these people have their own relationship with God. They got their own churches over there, falling out, catching the spirit. They do all of that in Africa, India, all these places.
Yes.
But it's this thing of, we think that the way that I worship is the right way, and I think that that's what we have to get over. So I want to talk to you about, like, because you're a DEI, you're becoming a DEI practitioner, right? So applying that DEI lens to the church, like, what advice would you have for anyone navigating the racial divide in the house of the Lord? Because I know this problem exists. I even was a part of a network of schools where there would be white churches, Black churches. So how would you advise someone, like, what advice would you have for someone navigating the racial divide in the Christian faith? Like, within their church, people are segregated. How would you tell them to work through that?
Sometimes I try to censor myself, and I think I've often see how God has used that for his glory, of like, I'll just be sitting in a room and I'd be like, yeah, that's weird. I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. Like, that, I don't really agree with that theology. And where's that from? Can you expand upon that context? And like, being bold and just saying, like, why is it this way? And like, have you ever questioned that? Like, why does it have to be this way? Is this the only way?
Hmm.
You know, I think is really important, and has like spurred on conversation, and also just standing in the validity of who God has made me to be. You know, I love that God sees to the heart of people.
Absolutely.
Because I could be dancing all around and doing really evil stuff behind, like,
Oh my God.
no, I'm just being honest. And you could be standing perfectly still and also be doing evil stuff all around.
You're right.
So thankfully, I serve a God that sees people's hearts and can be like, oh, okay, like I know where this person's heart's at. Like I know where they're like where their alignment is, right? So like dancing or not dancing, soprano or tenor or bass or whatever, it like all of that, like it doesn't make anybody more holier than whatever. Like no, it really doesn't. At the foot of the cross, we are all made equal. Period.
It's extra. It's so extra. And I think it's because like, but even the Bible says man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, right? So that's the verse. And I think that's in Psalms, if I'm not mistaken. So it's all coming for a circle, but I'm not sure if it's in Psalms. But there's a verse about like people looking at the outward appearance. So people look at other people. The white people are saying, well, black people worship. Black people are saying white people worship. And we're not even thinking about each other beyond the forced categories that have been placed on us. We're not thinking about each other. So I really love the fact that even your husband supports that. Like, hey, say it. Be bold, go forth and say it. So now we're at this point where we've talked a lot about like Maverick City, the church, everything. But I also want to talk about you being a trailblazer. We've alluded to this a bit earlier, but I want to revisit this point of being a trailblazer. I remember in our conversation call before this, you talked about yourself as a trailblazer. So you consider yourself to be a trailblazer, and rightfully so, because you were instrumental in using your perspective as a Black Christian. And you keep on doing this to represent DEI within these Christian spaces. I want to know, like, why do you think the word trailblazer fits or embodies your journey?
I think the word trailblazer fits and embodies my journey so far. Because I feel like God has a sense of humor in making me the first to a lot of people to do certain things that they've seen, right? I am my mom's firstborn. So I was the first for her to go to college in America, and that was an adventure for her and myself with my little brother coming behind me. And so I got used to like learning how to figure things out on my own. When having to like, okay, like, and there's like a beauty in that and also like heartbreak in that, because you're like, I would love some help with this, but then I also am not beholden to anybody's like rules on how to do things necessarily, because I don't have someone to show me the way. So it's like I can really try and play things and figure out what works for me. And I've seen that over my life. I've seen that in the ways of which like I think oftentimes I went to like from third grade to about, I think all the way up to high school, except for one interval there, I was in PWI spaces for public schooling. And I think I was like, for some people, like the first kind of smart Black girl they had seen, you know, who spoke. People kept saying, oh, you're so well spoken. Like you speak so well. And I'm like, okay, like what's that supposed to mean? Like I don't really, I speak. And I think some people just weren't used to that. So I don't know I hope that answers your question. I feel like I didn't, so I apologize.
No, that does. That does answer my question. So you talked about the fact that you as a person, you have this spirit of being the first.
Yeah.
And you even talked about your childhood at the PWI public schools, where you were this oftentimes first encounter with, I don't want to say diversity, but with an outside perspective that challenged your classmates, even with people saying you're well-spoken. Why do people say that? And I used to always be like, well, I don't know why people say I'm well-spoken. It's because there's this assumption that, oh, all Black people speak like this. Yeah. So when I see someone who challenges that, I have to say, and it could be like, oh, she challenges it well. Like, oh, like she doesn't fit into the box that I put this group of people in. That represents you. And it goes back to the spirit of boldness that we talked about too. So I think you did answer it. You talked about why you're a trailblazer. You just have that in you to be the first, to try new things, to hop into things, first in your family to go to college in the US. That's great. That's like, these are the little things that I think, let me not say little things. These are the big little things that we look over, because traditionally we think of a trailblazer to be like, oh, like I have to be this big CEO or first Black president or first. No, even if you're like the first in your family to buy a house, that's a trailblazer moment. Sure. That's like breaking. We say this a lot in the church. That's breaking generational patterns, right?
That's Aurora coming here with the word. She wanted to give us the word today.
No, that's true. That's breaking generational curses like all the time. And in the faith, they say that a lot. Like that's what it is. So I love that. I think that you embody that pretty well. My next question for you is like, how do you hope to blaze a trail in the future, inside and outside of faith-based spaces? Like, if you look ahead, what do you see yourself doing?
Honestly, at this point, I really don't know. And I love that. I tend to be like me in high school, and I think a bit of like for a good minute in college, I was definitely more on I need to control everything. Like I need to sit, I have a journal where I had a timeline on like, this is when we're going to accomplish this. And this is when we're going to accomplish that. And this is when we're going to take vacation. And my uncle was like, yeah, that's cool. That's cute. But there's life, like, and not trying to be in control of everything. Because the reality is I'm not in control of everything, right? Like I can plan, and it's not a bad thing to plan, but I need to also know how to pivot when life decides to life and throw curveballs at you, tsunamis, waves, deserts, all the things. And so I actually kind of like that I'm in this space of, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm open. I'm open to like dreaming big again. And like doing experiences, like one of the things I was realizing, I was talking to Dee. She's also a really great DEI mentor in the identity organization. I can't wait for people to get to hear her podcast. I was talking to her and I was like, I'm going to write a letter to God about what I want in my next job opportunity to be. And one of the things I wrote was, I want to be able to go to the Cannes Film Festival. I love films, but I never saw myself going to Cannes. I was like, why would I go? Like, is there any reason?
Put that dream.
But the Lord was like, why not? Why can't you go to Cannes Film Festival? Who says I can't make
the Lord? Yeah.
I'm like, okay, we're going to go to Cannes Film Festival. Okay, like we're going to write that down. So just open to like what the Lord has.
Nah, I love that. And I love how is it your uncle who said like, hey, there's our desires and then there's life. I feel like the best, as someone who I'm a planner, I'm more on the planner side. You probably
have not noticed it also.
Yeah. No, I'm more of the planner. And I think that for me, I even have to know, like, I grew up here and let go and let God. How do you do that? Because it's like, nah, I'm more on the planner side. I won't say I'm the most type A because I don't like sweat over the small stuff, but I like to know where my life is going. And I think there were times where I had to relinquish that and just trust God. And I think that's like the walk of a believer, understanding that the path that I'm going to blaze is going to happen irrespective of what's going on around me. I just need to have faith in that. I loved how you talked about Cannes Film Festival. It's bringing back to me this verse in the Bible, Habakkuk 2:2, write the vision down and make it plain. And I think people have been saying that all the time since COVID-19, because I think COVID was a time where we lost our vision as a people. And when you said Cannes Film Festival, I was just screaming, like, I didn't want to interrupt you. Write it down. Write that thing down, because I feel like so many things that have happened in my life, including identity and this, I wrote it down. And before I even knew I was going to have the chance to do this, I started believing it. So I would say, write that down and believe it, believe on it. I love that. I love that openness. So going back to this point of openness, you decided to become a missionary after college, which, let me tell you, you grew up in the church. You were in the church in college and then decided to become a missionary. So that's great. That's like, you love God. Okay. Nah, that's great. Why did you decide to become a missionary? And like, was there a moment where God called you to it? Just like I was calling you to Cairns, right? Was there a moment where God called you to this missionary work?
To be honest, no.
Okay.
And I'm going to be very blunt in saying that because, I mean, I think there's too many times where I think there's this romanticism sometimes of like, I was called, you know, and I'm like, and I'm grateful. Okay, I'm not, okay, Lord, please help me. I'm not trying to make fun of people. I really am not. I'm just saying there's sometimes this romanticism behind being called. No, I was stubbornly like, I love being a student leader with this Christian organization in college. And I want to see, like, I would love to continue doing this because at the time I loved ministering to college students. I love the questions they ask. I love that they ask hard questions that make you stutter and make you go, oh, maybe I'm having an existential crisis. I love existential crises. I'm all for them. I think people need to have them and opt into the growth that they bring. And so for me, it was a moment of like, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to go do it. And I remember my boss at the time that I was working under was like, you know, I can tell, like, you're very stubborn, but I can work with stubborn because you using it for the glory of God. Be stubborn because, like, I mean, I even was seeing a spiritual director at the time because I was like, is God calling? Yes. Which was something which I think if anybody has a chance to have a spiritual director at some point in their life, do it. It is so awesome. Like when you get a good, like when you get one you click with, it is amazing. It will like, so I was doing spiritual direction at the time, and my, because I was trying to determine like, does the Lord want me to stay in Maryland and do this work, or does He want me to move to Florida? And honestly, now that I look back at the journal entries I wrote during that time, I felt like the Lord was trying to say, go to Florida. But me and my cute self was like, nah, like I want to do this work. And I felt like the Lord was so gracious and was just like, okay, you'll go play. You go do it, you know? And I feel like people don't want to say those kind of stories out loud. Like I think they're talked about in inner circles. Yeah. But I want to break that. Like, no, I did not feel called to the point where when I sat down with the hiring director, because so how it works is that with this particular organization, depending on the region you are working in, they will go through an internship process. So I was an intern ministry staff. Okay. My missionary field was college campuses. Whoa, I know, like that weirds people out, like mission field being a college campus, not Africa, not Asia. What? Yeah. Not even Latin America.
It's different. Right?
It's different. So because I know when people assume missionary, they're thinking I'm in some kind of no. I'm like down the street. It's no. And so I remember he like sat me down after like my period, like there was like a particular evaluation period I think I was going through. And he's like, honestly, I think you have it. I think you have like the natural giftings for this. Ooh. But to be honest, I am not feeling a particular impression for the Lord that this is what you should be doing right now. And to be honest, I would love to hire you. And if you decide to accept, like if you decide to like you want to do this, great, we'll work with you. But if you also decide not to, understandable. And I am so grateful to that person to this day for that honesty and that statement.
Wow.
Because he could have easily manipulated the situation because there's not a lot of, to be honest, like this is a whole nother conversation, but in like collegiate missionary work, they are desperately in need of people of color to come do the work.
No, they are
100%. Desperately in need. But the problem is it's often not sustainable for us because of systemic issues and just also like the racism in the church that no one really wants to talk about. Yeah. Raising funds. And so he could have very well manipulated the situation and be like, oh, like, we'll hire you. It'll be great. Like, God will do amazing things. But I loved his honesty and his vulnerability in that moment to be able to say, like, as a leader, like, I would love to hire you, but I don't know if that's where the Spirit is leading us to work together in this way, in consideration of all that.
All right. Fadaka got me ready to shout. You didn't feel called. That's very unique, because I'm here writing and I'm like, okay, I feel like Fadaka had that moment where God just shined on her and said, you're supposed to do this. Oh, snap. But that's real though. Like, that's real. Like, it was an option. It was an option. And I took that. That's real though, because like, I think I'm one of those people when to romanticize this calling thing to the point where I spent my whole 4 years in college, not really thinking pragmatically. I was working during college. Like, I did my internships, but I was like, what has God called me to? Like, I need my Moses moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I need that moment where like, I feel like God has called me to this. Like, I need that moment. And I got my moment. But at the same time, I'm glad you said you can be doing something for the Lord and still not feel that. Don't depend on that feeling. Wow, I know what you are thinking. What an amazing conversation. I feel like there were so many memorable moments from this conversation. You know, it's not every day that we are allowed to express our faith and how our faith has impacted our careers. So I'm forever grateful to Fadaka for her vulnerability and her willingness to hold space with me as we discussed the topic of faith, Psalms for the Trailblazer. We talked about so many different topics and touched on so many deep and important issues. And I encourage you today to ask yourself, how does your faith impact your career? Whether or not you believe in God, I want to end this podcast episode with a prayer and a meditation. I want us to all think about the fact that we have so much to be grateful for and that God has done so much for all of us. I hope that you find your own psalm as you look towards your career and as you look towards the developments that are ahead. All right, y'all. Thank you for listening to The Purposeful Professional. Once again, follow the podcast, share, like, and let us know what you think. Let us know what you think. Thank you. And looking forward to more episodes and growing alongside you all. Bye.